All right, good morning. So our topic today is self-care, and really with the eye of like using the summer to our advantage to start some self-care routines if we have not already done that, with the idea that we want to practice self-care for ourselves as the adults and the parents so that we can model that behavior for our kids so that they can see how important it is. And so my question that I had posted was, how do you practice self-care? And I'm curious if you guys had a quick answer. Yvonne, do you have a quick answer on practicing self-care?
I think for me, it's taking time every day to just be alone. Like usually like right after I get home from work, I will take about 20 minutes to just like lay there and decompress. And then I'll get up and do all the things I had to do. That's probably the main one, the one that I make sure that I do every single day, is just to like give myself time to just take a breath and take a minute.
Yeah. Virginia put in the chat, me time. Absolutely. I totally agree with both of you. I actually see the time to, be by myself like that is like my me time. And like Amy says, trying to go for a walk. Those are all really great things. I know personally, as I'm a very introverted person, and so I need that time, especially if and so it's interesting because like this year where I haven't been having to come to school every day, I like haven't needed it quite as much. But on a day where I'm at school and around people all day, I absolutely need that time where I'm just by myself. And like you said, Yvonne, 20 minutes is perfect, but just having that time to just decompress and like, yeah, it's really, really important.
And I don't know if you've ever done this. Your commute is probably longer than mine, but sometimes I wish mine was a little bit longer. It's only like 6 minutes, because that time in the car for me is already like part of that process of just like taking a breath. And so
I do have a commute. I have about a 30-minute commute, and a lot of people were like, oh my God, but I love my commute. When there's heavy traffic, I don't love it because then it's too much. But just the normal 30 minutes, it's the perfect amount of time, like in the morning for me to the family and all the chaos of like leaving the house and setting that aside and getting them ready to like in that work frame of mind. And then the same thing, like when I drive home in the late afternoon, evening, being able to like reset, okay, I'm leaving work behind and now I can focus on family time. It is a really great time.
No, I think transition's perfect. I wanted to talk a little bit today about like why it's extra important this year. And so I wanted to validate the last year and what that meant and what that looked like as a parent. Because as this year is winding down, I'm usually wiped out by this time of the year, but this week and this like the last couple of weeks, I am burnt. Like you can see it in my face. My husband's like, oh my gosh, are you okay? And I was like, what is different? What is different? And then I kind of started laughing to myself of like, oh, that's right. The whole world is different. That's probably has something to do with that. And so, going back to like March of 2020 and what that's been like for us as parents, I don't know that everybody fully understands and appreciates what that was. And so I was just kind of jotting some thoughts down. It's like, I said, let's take a minute to acknowledge what we've accomplished this year. This is like a pat ourselves on the back kind of moment, because when I look back and really like detail in my mind the things that we've all overcome together, I'm like, we're pretty awesome, but it's definitely taken a toll on us. And, as parents, I remember in the beginning of like, will I be able to get groceries? Will we have toilet paper? Are my kiddos going to get sick? Some people lost their jobs. Some people lost family members. The unknown. I know you're like me, Jenny, where we like to know what's going to happen next. And it was like a whole year of not knowing what was next. And so like all these little things I think of as like little bricks that we carry on our shoulders, right? As it gets really heavy. Health anxiety, fear about the state of the world, no control over anything, learning how to manage a different lifestyle, learning how to work at home, helping your kids manage their school lifestyle, political issues, isolation and the effect, not being able to see our loved ones, worrying about our kids' sleep schedule, worrying about our kids not being motivated, worrying about our kids' grades, like just worry, worry, worry. And as the world starts to open up a little bit, I got to thinking like, I kept saying in the beginning, like, I'll never go back to how I was, I'm going to always make time for puzzles and gardens and those kind of things. And, over the last couple of weeks with work picking up, I've totally neglected to prioritize myself. And so that's why I kind of wanted to validate like what we've been through, because it requires like recovery. It was traumatic. It was difficult. It was heavy. It was, very challenging for a lot of us. And for us to just think we can slide back into normal life doesn't necessarily work like that.
Well, and I think also, I don't know about how you feel. I feel like as stuff has opened up and things have loosened up, like with the vaccinations and like, I feel like on the surface, it seemed like it was kind of a slow easing back, but I don't know. In reality, it felt like, oh no, like things are back to like normal. And like there's just a lot of stuff. And I don't know if it's the rush to, oh, we haven't seen family and friends in so long. And so you want to, see everybody. And so like you're doing more. I know for myself, like I was actually yesterday, like, oh, thank God it's a 3-day weekend. I so need this 3-day weekend to just calm down, like decompress before like the next week, the last week of school with graduation and everything and all the craziness with that. And just having it like, okay, have like a couple of days to reset. My Manuel, who's our head custodian, he just came in and he's got his vacation day request. He's like, yeah, I need to take tomorrow off. He's like, I'm wiped. I need to have a 4-day weekend before like all like the craziness of next week. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. Like, take care of yourself. It's really important.
I mean, to be able to normalize that, like, I love that example. It's like, everybody should take a mental health day at some point. Everybody should be able to slow it down. And I think that was the silver lining of COVID. It was all negative, but there was that silver lining of, prior to it, our lives were defined by how fast we could move and how productive we were. And then to get to a point where all of a sudden the new normal, it's like we're doing nothing. We're, I spent a lot of time on my phone, a lot of time reading. And I caught myself the other day saying, man, I'm going to really miss being able to read. And I'm like, well, why do I have to miss that? Right? Like, why am I all of a sudden jumping back into the unhealthy habits that I had of unnecessarily filling my day? Right? Like, I noticed people are starting to have parties now. And I already felt that sense of obligation of like, I really just want to stay home and do nothing, but I should go. I should probably go and hang out, and I should probably go and do this. And one by one, those things and those obligations and those, events are starting to pile up already, right? It's graduation season and we missed it last year. So it's like my whole weekend that I wanted to like get the house together and just do my thing is now filled with a few things that I'm not super crazy about doing. Right. And so I'm not practicing self-care in, being able to say no. Virginia says, I agree. I also can admit that it may be difficult to understand that one needs that. I used to believe that I couldn't take a mental health day because my family would fall apart. I had to understand and learn that it is okay. And that's amazing to model that for your kids, that sometimes you're not okay. Sometimes you're moving too fast. Sometimes you need to slow down. And, I still have that feeling of like, if I'm not feeling good, my kids are going to starve. Well, my kids are 18, 14, and 13. They know how to put a Marie Callender's pot pie in the oven now, right? Like in my worst case scenario, but to give yourself permission to do that is something that we find really hard to do.
Yeah. Virginia, I could not agree with you more. I think that it's just so important to admit to yourself and be kind to yourself. Like, and that's in our family therapy that, we do every Wednesday. We actually talked about this last night. It's amazing how this is like it was by accident, but what I talk about in family therapy Wednesday night, and then we come back and we talk about it in these groups on Thursday morning. But we talked about, like self-validating and like having self-validating statements. And like, we had to make our own self-validating statements for ourselves. And one that I wrote for myself was like, it makes sense that I'm tired and it's okay to be gentle with myself. And like, I think that like just that forgiveness of, especially as mothers, that we like have so much, stuff going on in our own lives, like, whether you're a working mother or you're taking care of the house or like whatever, like, just like all these responsibilities, and then looking after your kids and like making sure that they're doing everything that they need to be doing. It can just be exhausting, physically and emotionally exhausting. And just being able to say and forgive yourself for being exhausted and be like, okay, I got to take care of myself. And then I'm going to be able to come back and I'm going to be okay. This is something that this past year with teachers, oh gosh, for the teachers, this has been so hard, and having to teach via distance learning, it has not been an easy thing. This is, there's a lot of times since I've gone into administration that I've actually missed teaching. This has been a year that, like, thank God I'm not actually having to like be the teacher in the classroom, because it's so hard. And so, on social media, I follow a lot of like teacher type, things, and they, so many memes for teachers about, like, oh, your administrator's telling you to practice self-care, but they're drowning, and they're like, how can we even practice self-care? We're like so buried. And I totally get that when you are so overwhelmed and somebody says like, hey, remember self-care, that you're like, I don't have time for self-care. But you have to make the time. You have to. And even if it's 5 minutes of like sitting down and just like doing some breath work and breathing and like clearing your mind, that can make a huge difference. Everybody, I don't care how busy you are, you have 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's what I tell the students all the time. They're like, Miss Gunter, I will miss out on time to do work. I'm like, well, you use the bathroom, right? That's 5 minutes. Okay, so it's just like that, 5 minutes. Think of it as like a necessary function for your body, and take the time out to do that. I think, going back to like the mom thing, it's like, it's always been a guilt thing for me to take a step back, to not be there to do these things. And I always like envied that my husband could go on like a work trip or come home late from work and not feel bad about it. Like he just like did it, and that was just it, and nobody said anything. But when I would come home late, or if I was working late or busy on my laptop at home, I noticed that the kids were like, getting needy, or they wanted something and all these things. And I felt terrible. Like, gosh, maybe I should not do this and spend more time with them. So there's always that like added layer of guilt. And so when we look back about this past year, it's like all those things I talked about, like all the horrible things we had to worry about last year. And then on top of that, we're either working or taking care of our families, or both, and feeding people and cleaning up. And it's like, all of a sudden I have 3 kids that need 3 meals a day, when I used to just ship them off to school and have them do that. And it's like, I am done. I'm tired. Like, I'm just super tired. And how do I reset myself this summer, to do it and not make it just something I can do on my time off? Like, how do I incorporate these healthy things in my everyday life? And people mistake self-care and self-indulgence, right? And so, self-indulgence would be like, oh, I'm having a bad day, I'm going to eat a pint of Ben and Jerry's, or I'm going to go spend an exorbitant amount of money to make myself feel better. And that's not self-care, that's self-indulgence. So the actual World Health Organization definition of self-care is defined as the ability of individuals, families, and communities to promote health, prevent disease, maintain health, and cope with illness and disability with or without the support of a healthcare provider. That's the actual definition. So you're talking mind, body, disease, and I'll kind of, there's 6 categories of self-care, and we'll go over some of them. And I think some of us will find that, ooh, I don't do that. I don't make time for that. And, hopefully coming up with a plan where we can start to incorporate those things into our daily lives. I mean, something as simple as brushing your teeth and getting dressed in the morning is considered self-care, right? And so that's just something that, there's actually this sheet that I'll share with you guys, and it's like a little checkbox of like, these are the things I need to be doing all the time. So the true definition of self-care, it's pretty broad. It talks about like all these different areas of our life, but there's different categories, and there's the physical category, psychological, emotional, spiritual, social, and professional. So it's like a lot, right? Now it's kind of sounding like work, like, oh, that's a lot of things I have to think about. But like a few examples of self-care that you might not have considered: eating balanced meals, getting regular exercise, taking medication if you need it, doing meditation, saying no to activities you're really not interested in. Like those are all things. Saying no to extra tasks at work if it's just too much, like things like that, that we don't, saying, you guys, it's okay if you put a little microwave pizza in for dinner. Like I'm not going to beat myself up over it, because I know that the cost of me getting up and cooking dinner right now on my nerves and on my sanity is too much. And it's okay that you make your own dinner tonight, things like that. When you think about like, if you broke your leg, Jenny, unfortunately, right? It's like people see that, right? People can see that and they know, oh, we have to be extra gentle with her. We have to open the door for her. We have to help her out because she's, currently disabled.
Right.
But nobody sees when we're broken on the inside, right? And so giving ourselves permission to treat ourselves in that same way if we're feeling super overwhelmed, I think is something that we need to start practicing. I don't know how you do, like right now it's like crunch time for my kid in school, right? It's like, we got to graduate, we got to do all these things. And I'm not encouraging him to take care of himself right now. Like, I'm just like, nope, don't sleep, get through it. You have to do this. And in some situations, like, yeah, if he wants to graduate, that's what he has to do. But looking back over the course of his high school career, I wasn't really like, hey, you look like you're overwhelmed right now. Maybe we should go and do something healthy for you.
Right.
It's never ever been like that. I don't know how, in your house, like what does that look like? How do your kiddos see you taking care of yourself, and how do they do that for themselves? Is that a thing?
I think it is a thing. I think I traditionally have always actually been better at this. I'm certainly better at it than my husband is. My husband is terrible at self-care. But I've always kind of like been derogatory towards myself about it. Like, oh, that's my lazy side. But then like, I think that's what's changed about myself and like modeling is I don't look down on myself when I need that time. I mean, my favorite thing to do is curl up in bed and read my trashy novel and just like, that's like one of my biggest self-care things. I just love it. And, both of my kids will do the same type of thing, like curl up. They don't read as much as I do, but they'll, watch YouTube videos or watch TV. And like, it's just like kind of like taking that time. And I think that that's like, okay, to really have that decompression time. Now, if that's the only thing you're doing, I think with anything, like, there's, any type of like self-care, because then like what you're talking about, then it does go into the self-indulgence. And I really like what you said about the self-indulgence, because I think there is a line, where like it's self-care, but if you're doing it all the time, well, then it's self-indulgence. All right.
Totally. But like when you're reading a book or something at home, do you ever get that feeling of like feeling guilty that you should be doing something different?
Occasionally, certainly. And that's something I've gotten better about. I've just made a lot of changes in my life that now, because I am exercising, it used to be that like, oh, I should go exercise. I'm like laying here reading this book, but I really should go move my butt. And now usually I've already exercised. And so this is kind of like a reward to myself. Like, hey, I worked hard. I did what I had to do. And now I'm going to like chill and I'm going to read my book.
That's really good. It probably feels even more relaxing because you've already did the hard stuff.
Yeah, because I don't have the guilt anymore.
Yes. I think my guilt is more like, oh, my kid's been playing video games for a long time today. I should probably go and interact with him. Or, oh, I didn't make lunch. I guess I should probably get up and like fix the stack for people. Or it's just like all these like my kids will actually walk into my room when I'm just laying there watching something mindless on TV and they're like, you're being lazy. And I have to tell them, I'm like, no, actually, if I don't do this for the next 30 minutes, I'm probably going to be in a really bad mood. And I know how much fun that's going to be for you guys. And they'll literally like turn around and run out and shut the door. Like they know that my self-care and my alone time equals a nicer, friendlier, more protective mom around the house, right? Yeah. And I don't think we should have to feel really like guilty about it. So, but I like what you said, like do the important things and then, do your self-care, like do your exercise and do those things because it probably feels a lot better to not have things to do on your checklist.
Yeah, I tend to like think of it as like kind of like the reward myself. Like, oh, I have to, like, you're saying your son, like he's like cramming right now for the end of school. My daughter's doing the same thing. And like, whenever I have something like where I've got like a big project or a ton of work I have to do, or I have like a week of like really long nights, where I'm going to be away from home because I have to do a bunch of supervision and that sort of stuff. I tend to like, I'll like in my mind, like make plans like, okay, this weekend I'm going to have time for myself and this is how I'm going to spend it. And it's going to be my reward for all of the stuff I'm having to do now.
Yep.
And that's what helps me like get through it. Like tonight I have to go to yet another board meeting. And so
another
one. That's getting a little ridiculous.
But
then at the same time, I'm like, I don't have anything I have to do this weekend. I've got a weekend where I can work in the garden because that's something I enjoy. I can just spend time at home and just do stuff that I like to do. I don't any work stuff I have to do this weekend.
Yeah, I think a big thing of self-care this year is to think about like, what did I enjoy and what was I relieved that I was able to do during the year of shutdown? And is that something that felt good enough or was important enough for me to keep doing? And reading, this was the first year in decade at least that I read a book just like leisurely. Like, and it felt so amazing. And just thinking to myself, like that I had already kind of wrote it off as like, oh, that was cool that I got to do that, but I know it's never going to happen again. I really had to check myself. Like, it's really like, no, like these are things that we need to always be doing. And, my husband and we're obviously like middle age now. And we're like thinking like, man, what are the things that have been important? And what things do we want to continue to do? And it's okay. And we want to like enjoy our lives. And I think, a focus for us this year should be to like enjoy. I tell students all the time, it's like, yes, high school is tough. Yes, you have to do all this work, but please, please, please keep time in your schedule to do something enjoyable. Because heartbreaking that a lot of our students don't.
Yeah.
And I think if they saw us doing that and making that a priority in our lives, I think it's definitely something to model that they would follow,
I think one thing I've learned this year with like exercise, and when we talked about exercise and fitness, I mentioned that I put it in my calendar where I schedule time to do that. And I think that that's a great thing to model for your kids, and maybe not just exercise, but like scheduling in, this is the time I'm going to do the thing to take care of myself. And like you were like making a point and you're modeling that like, no, I've put this on my calendar. And so I don't know, some people have like a big family calendar, like, of all the different activities. And I think the mom self-care time is something to like put on there.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to talk a little bit about emotional self-care. And emotions are something that we all tend to pack down. And then the idea of emotional self-care is to acknowledge and deal with emotions and not just pack them down. Like you think back of like, my mom would always tell me, like, if I was sad, my mom would always say like, don't be sad. And I'm like, well, that didn't help. I'm still sad, right? Like just acknowledging that it's okay to feel things. It's okay as a mom to feel frustration, let down. Like, this whole week I've been like in the mindset of like, oh my gosh, like it was about me, right? Like I worked so hard to help this kid get through high school, and now we're at the cusp of him not finishing, and and just having all these emotions about it. And my husband like, just stop worrying, stop doing this. It's like, no, it's actually okay to have feelings about things. And I think that's what emotional self-care means, is that it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to not be happy all the time. It would be strange if we were happy 100% of the time. Our emotions fluctuate, right? And people are like, oh, I was sad. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to do that. And I think to normalize the fluctuation of our emotions is another thing that we have to model for our kids, because then when they're in distress, it's really hard to handle when you feel like you're not supposed to be. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Like just like that emotional like flexibility, I guess. Like it's okay to not, be happy all the time. And with emotions, it's like self-care and mental health go hand in hand. The more we acknowledge that, the more we spend time like, validating our feelings, the better our mental health is in the long run. We do. I'm trying to read Virginia's thing too. That's like Ginny with her workout. I try to teach my boys to get their work and chores done first, and then they'll have the rest of the day to do whatever they enjoy to do. If they take too many breaks in between, then the work will seem to drag on forever and get burnt out. Absolutely.
Yeah. No,
I'm all,
it's
wait,
totally true.
boys
I
be
mean,
chores?
yeah, but I mean, and I can be super bad about that. I mean, I can, procrastinate and things that I have something that I need to do for this afternoon. And I have to get it done because it's due and I have to get it done and it's a work thing. And I've had it on my calendar every day, like a chunk of time set aside for me to do this thing that I have to do. And I keep pushing it. Like on Monday, I'm like, oh, I'll do it. And so I moved it to Tuesday. And then Tuesday, I was like, oh, and I moved it to Wednesday. And then today, I'm like, no, I have to get it done. And I know I'm going to do it. And it's actually not going to take me that long and be that bad. But it's just sometimes you just, and I think, when we talk about modeling stuff for our kids, I think it's not like so much like you're teaching them, but you're talking about your own life and like, like just sharing like an anecdote, like with your kids, like, like, I was like, God, I had this thing that I had to do and I kept pushing it off and then I did it and it wasn't that big of a deal, but I'm so glad I got it done. And because they do that too, like that assignment for their statistics class. Like they just kept pushing off and like just get done. And it wasn't,
That's a good one. That's kind of what it feels like right now, closing up the end of the year. What I usually do is I go through every case that I've seen this year just to verify that everything, I circled back on everything, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, okay, if I get this done, I'm going to be able to have a much more restful break than if I don't. And I have all those worries. Like, I don't want any worries this summer. And it's like, well, why is it only summer? Like, that should be something that I want all year long. It's not easy when you have a job and you've got to close all those circles, but yeah, it's just exhausting.
Yeah, actually, well, before you move on, I wanted to say something about the emotional, what you were talking about with emotions and like letting yourself feel them and acknowledge. I think that's part of the acknowledgement. We've talked about that idea of radical acceptance this year. And I think that's part of it in accepting how you feel. I remember it was about a month ago, I was making dinner and whatever I was making, like it had splattered up and it landed on my wrist and it burned my wrist and like and I was like, hurts. And then like I was annoyed because my husband, which I say he never has his self-care. He was having a moment like where he was like in the living room and just reading a book and like, relaxing. And I was making dinner. And like, honestly, he doesn't do that. But because I was making dinner and I just burned my wrist and like, and then like, it was getting chaotic and I was just getting so irritated, like in my head, like, why won't he come in and help? Did I ask him to come in and help? No. But I'm like, why won't he come in and help? And I'm like, and the kids probably aren't going to eat this anyway. And I was just getting so angry and frustrated. And then like, I finished making dinner and I was like, dinner's ready. And like, I actually like took my plate and like went and I locked myself in the bedroom and like ate it by myself. And like Paul came up and he's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "You have to leave me alone for 5 minutes." And he was like, "All right." And I just needed to feel all the emotions and like be by myself. And then I let it go. And then I was fine. He probably thinks I'm a psycho because I never actually explained to him like what was going on in my head. But I was like, I just need to like because I didn't want to yell at him. He hadn't done anything. And I knew I was being unreasonable. I knew that I was just feeling these feelings, but I needed to feel the feelings.
Oh my gosh, that story just sounds like life in general, right? Like I'm cooking and he's sitting there. Like he's actually doing self-care probably, but
Right.
not acknowledging that the rest of the family has needs, right? Like, but like you said, like you needed that moment. Had you not taken that time out to go eat by yourself, what would have happened?
Like my crankiness would have continued.
Yes.
Like I would have been cranky and like short tempered with my family for the rest of the evening and snapped at them.
Yep.
And like that's a mistake. And that's something I've learned. Like I, and I'm having to teach this to my daughter because my daughter and I have very similar personalities. And like I have always been somebody that can get like when I haven't had that alone time, I can get very short tempered with people and just, and it's not great. And you take it out on your loved ones. And my daughter has found the same thing. And so, she's asked me for advice, like how I deal with stuff. And I just have learned I need a quick timeout. Like I just need to and honestly, it doesn't take that long, 15, 20 minutes, but that's when I need to like have it and just feel all the feelings and just like regroup and relax. And then I'm fine. But like just learning to take that. And I think with our kids, because oftentimes our kids have, it's genetics. They have very similar personalities to like either you or your partner and like, one parent, and just teach them like, this is how I deal with stuff.
Yeah. I think that's great. And then I think the ability to be able to communicate that at some point is probably helpful. But like you in that situation, it's like, I don't know why in my head, I just assumed that everyone's supposed to know what's going on with me and just back off. Right. And so when I'm in that same headspace of like, I'm just irritable, I need a time out. I don't know why every time I'm and it's probably just because I'm irritable in that moment. Every time I'm irritable like that, my husband has the dumbest question to ask me. And he doesn't know where I am, right? Because it's all in my head. And then he asked me a question and I'm like, do I need to answer that right now? Like, is that really like important? Right? And he's like, whoa. But like, if I would have been more in tune with where I was emotionally, I would have known ahead of time to like, maybe I just need to step away or maybe I need to walk away. Like, I think so that emotional self-care is like acknowledging that, maybe even communicating that, and then taking the time to give yourself a timeout. Like it's okay to do that. And I need to do better at respecting that my kids need that too. I don't know if you've ever gotten in a fight with one of your kids, like you're yelling at each other or you're all upset, and my kid will go in his room and he needs a timeout. But there's been instances where I want to make it right now. And I go into his room and I try to give him a hug and fix it. And he's like, get out. And I'm like, but I just, and I'm like, okay, I'm not honoring the space that he needs in that moment. And what makes me feel like I have that right to take that away from him. I don't know if you ever had that experience, but my middle and I were like fire and ice together sometimes. And I just
definitely with my son. And I've just learned not to do that. I've learned that I've got to give him his space. And then then I approach it later. I mean, we just had that 2 days ago, and where we like had this and he was like freaking out, and I'm like, and like we just said back off, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna let this go right now. Like I'm gonna let this go right now. And then later on we talked about it, and it was good because it was actually really helpful because having that time out and like letting it go, and like my daughter witnessed the whole thing. She's like, you gave up too easily. Like you just like backed off too soon. And I was like, no, I needed to, because it was going to go nowhere. And because I did that, when I talked to him, he was able to tell me what the problem was. Like I like figured now, like I know what it was. Whereas if I had just pressed it that moment, I wouldn't have gotten to like what's actually happening right now.
Yeah, I like how your daughter gives you parenting advice. My kids all do that. They're like,
Yeah.
Mom, I think you should be harder on him. I'm like, when did this become an us? Like,
Kids are always like so hard on their siblings and on their peers, like just like running a school, like what kids think should happen to other students. I'm like, wow, you're really harsh.
yeah,
Like they are very like unforgiving. So
but I think that emotional piece, like that emotional self-care piece, is probably one of the most important, because if you're not in the headspace to do something or feel a certain way, you're not going to until you take that time to acknowledge where you are. Another piece of the emotional self-care, they talk about like finding inspiration. And that's just like, it could be anything from like gardening to just taking care of the earth or animal. I mean, whatever it is, just having that inspiration gives you something emotionally positive. And I think that's helpful. Like, I'm so fortunate to be inspired by the work that I do, like inspired by mental health and seeing people get better. That for me, it brings me a lot of peace and joy. And, you know, some people think that's weird that I feel that way, but it does. And so I think it's important that we all have something, maybe not just our kiddos, because, you know, I know they're so inspirational, but something additional that's just for us that really inspires us to keep moving forward when things get tough. This next section, Ginny, is all you. It's the physical self-care. You're doing so good this year. And I think it, you know, not only does it improve our mood and our health and our longevity in our, you know, every area, like physical, whether it's exercise or getting out and getting sun. This has been my biggest advice all year. There's not a lot of things we can do, but we can all get outside and get some sun and get that vitamin D. And it really, I've never ever heard anybody say, you know, I went outside and then I came in because it made me feel worse. Besides allergies, I've never heard that people say that like going outside makes things worse, you know?
yeah.
And then the physical also incorporates like eating healthy. You know, my kids decided that we wanted froyo for dinner the other night. And I felt so gross afterwards. And I'm like, man, I forget, like just eating healthy, like you just feel better, right? I mean, and froyo's fine, but maybe dinner wasn't like our best choice. But just like encouraging our family, like all these parts of us physically can definitely be, you know, a wonderful way to take care of ourselves.
Well, and I think the summertime is actually, when you talk about eating healthy, that's a great time to like start those habits. You know, when there's all the farmers markets and like there's like fresh produce. I mean, we're lucky in California that we have pretty good produce year round. But like you can, you know, like the local stuff and like, you know, really take advantage of that. You know, spending out time and like grilling your food and like, you know, just being healthier. And like, I think having those habits, the summer is a really great time to take advantage of that and start those healthy habits. Actually, one thing that I'm going to be personally working on this summer, you know, my whole year of fitness, and like you said, I mean, it's been going really well, and I give myself a pat on the back because honestly, I like never thought I could be this dedicated to exercise. But in a couple of weeks, I mean, I work from home part of the week, and I have for, you know, well over a year now, but we are all as like an admin team and all the classified school. Once summer starts June 7th, we're coming back 5 days a week.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to have to figure out how do, like, now that I'm returning and driving to work on a daily basis, how do I still find the time to keep up what I've established for myself? Like, you know, it's been easier because I've been at home. Like there's been days that, yeah, I exercise, but I do it during my lunch break because I don't have any meetings and I can do it real quick. And because I'm at home, I'm going on Zoom, nobody can smell me. And so it's fine. But I'm not gonna like, it's either going to be early in the morning or in the evening. I'm going to have to like figure that out. And it's going to be harder. Like that's always, I just know like in the past, like that's always something that's like held me up, is like being tired from work and like not being able to have that balance.
Yeah.
And so that's my personal goal over the summer.
You all have to come back in June? No.
It's
Yeah.
time. It's time.
Maybe we need to get another bike to just have here at work.
That would be cool.
The smell factor, never mind. Another piece of physical that I hope everybody's really prioritizing is sleep. And, there's been days during this past year where I didn't get a good night of rest. And in the afternoon, I took a nap. That luxury will be gone. I won't be able to do that anymore. So making sure that we are prioritizing sleep. And I tell people all the time that there is no medication, there is no therapist that is better than a good night of rest. And it's something that we tend to skimp on. A lot of students, it's almost like a badge of honor. Like the less you sleep, the cooler you are. I don't know if you've heard that from kids. Like, I only got 3 hours last night. Oh,
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And I have a husband who kind of suffers from that, and he's 50. So like sometimes people, they don't necessarily, because my husband will be like, oh no, I'm gonna stay up and I'm like, dude, you need to, but he's also, he has this fear of dementia and getting Alzheimer's when he's older. And so I showed him recently this study that like the less sleep you get, the more likely you are to develop Alzheimer's. And I'm like, you better start going to bed. One thing, and Yvonne, I know I've told you, I don't think I like announced this to the whole parent group. A couple weeks ago, it's been about 3 weeks, I got this new fitness tracker. It's called a Whoop. I'm not advertising and selling for them, but it's what's really cool about it. You wear it constantly, and sure, it measures your exercise, but it also measures your sleep and it measures your recovery every day. And so that's been really fascinating to me to see the relationship of me not getting enough sleep or having like really poor sleep and what that does to my recovery. And I just, you always know, like logically, like, oh, I didn't get enough sleep, I'm tired the next day, but just how like it really kind of, because I'm, getting like the data and the charts, and like my recovery was only 25%. Oh no, like I need to like, it kind of has been forcing me to like, all right, I need to not push myself in my workout then. I need to make sure I go to bed tonight. So I know the people who are numbers driven, this is something that can really help. And especially for our kids, because our kids tend to be, especially at Piedmont, they tend to be very numbers driven, and like little scientists and mathematicians. And like, this could be something that they really respond to. And having that, just data like, oh, I didn't get enough sleep, my body has not recovered. And so,
yeah, that's true. And then to be able to compare that to like your productivity level for that day, your mood for that day, and like realizing there is a relationship between the amount you sleep and the way that you feel. I'm grumpy when I don't sleep. Like, I know that. I tend to make worse choices about my food when I don't sleep. I tend to get an afternoon headache when I don't sleep. Like all these things I know, but it would be kind of cool to know like how many hours did I really get? I know I went in my bed at 10, but between the TV and my phone, like how many hours of solid rest did I actually get? Probably not that many. So I wish we can kind of switch that culture to like brag about how many hours we get, right? Like, I got 10.
yeah.
Oh yeah, I got 10 and a half. Like that. It just seems so like far-fetched in the state of our society, right? Like kids are like working all the time. And I have a student, he always comes to my mind, and this is years ago. And he had this like basically like this spreadsheet of like his daily productivity. It was literally down to like some of my wasted time is in the bathroom taking a shower. Like it was just this like totally like spreadsheet. And so I'm looking over the spreadsheet and I'm like, well, where's fun? And he's like, well, and then he like pulls up this little calculation. He's like, well, I've allotted myself this much fun based on, how productive. I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, no, like you don't want to be too, neurotic about it. But he just really was like down to it. And it's like, I don't think people always realize especially teenagers, the importance of those times where your brain gets a break. Whether it's a mindless show or a walk or music or whatever, like it really gives your brain that time to recover.
So, and I think that, when we talk about modeling self-care for our kids, especially as mothers, they can tend to see us working, doing stuff for them, driving around, running errands, cooking dinner, washing the dishes, cleaning the house. If they always see us like working, doing chores, because I know a lot of mothers like, oh, I wait till the kids to go to bed and then I have my time. But then your kids never see you like having the fun.
That's true.
They need to, like, even if it's you talking to one of your friends on the phone, or you're going to go out. I went out 2 nights ago, and like, because now we can go to restaurants again, I went out with two of my girlfriends that I haven't seen, really spent time with in person. And and it was so great. But like, and my kids, like, I remember I was saying goodbye to my son, and I'm like, hey Nathan, I'll see you later. And he's like, he looks up from his video game. He's like, wait, where are you going? And I was so proud of him that he actually acknowledged that I had spoken to him, that I was leaving. And then he was like, wait, where are you going? And I was like, oh, I'm going out to dinner with Jen and Amy. And he's like, okay, good. and but like, your kids need to see, like, if we want our kids to like schedule in and like acknowledge that the fun is important, they need to see us doing that too, because it is really important.
I mean, because really, if your kids only see the like tough parts, like I can't imagine that anybody's enthusiastic about becoming an adult. Like, I think back, my mom was always working. She was always like, tired and cranky. And I've mentioned this before, how she like gives me a hard time about how much self-care I give myself. And, in my day, you guys were always first and I always did this and that. And I'm like, and you were miserable. And I don't want to be that way. Like, she's the happiest little grandma you could ever imagine. But I don't think she had the opportunity to feel that when we were young, because she was just so focused on the day-to-day tasks and making sure we had what we needed. And really, I can't think of, oh gosh, I really can't think of any time that I saw her doing something that was just for her. She's just selfless like that, right? And that's good in some ways, but it's dangerous in other ways. She had a lot of health problems later on, and I don't want that for myself. I don't want that for my kids. And so I really want to like normalize that, like, taking care of yourself is a good thing. It's not a selfish thing. It's what you have to do.
Yeah, now that I think about it, growing up, there was 2 times my mom went, I don't think it was back-to-back years. I think there was like a 2-year gap in between, but she took a 3-week trip to China with like this group of people. And I mean, as a kid, I was in like middle school when she did this. And as a kid, it sucked because like my dad was in charge for 3 weeks, and like that was a whole ordeal. Because, dads. But I think that taught me that like, it's okay as a mom to not always travel with the family, to like go and do that. And I, as an adult, that is not something that I ever feel guilty about, that I'm like, I'm going to go off and I'm going to have, a weekend trip with my friends. Like, it is not something that I ever feel bad about. And I think I learned that. And I like, actually, never even made that connection, but my mom did that and didn't feel bad about it. And really enjoyed it. And
does she still like talk about it? And
yeah, she absolutely does.
My mom did a trip by herself to England. This was many, many years ago. We were still a little bit younger. And she still regards it as like one of the highlights of her life. And that was the one time I can really remember doing something that was only for her. And it makes me kind of sad, because it's like, she's older and she can travel now, but it's not as easy as it was back then. That, man, she could have had so many more opportunities to do those things for herself, because looking back, I see how much joy that brought her. And I'm like, oh man, I mean, you know me, I'll travel without my kids all the time. Like, but to give yourself permission to do that, it wasn't modeled for me, but I'm glad it's something that I've just incorporated in my life. Really quickly, I just want to talk about practical self-care. And so the way we do practical self-care is, a good place to start is by taking inventory of areas of your life where stress creeps in. For me, this tends to be my house gets messy because the kids, and meal planning. Those are my 2 stressors. Like, those are the ones that I know like get me agitated. And so focusing on those, getting a handle on those areas of my life where I notice the stress pop up. So that's like a practical way to care for yourself. I don't know what your stressors are. I mean, obviously there's work stuff, but like when you're at home on the weekend, what kind of things creep up that add stress to your life?
Clutter around the house, which is, actually have big plans. So like I need to clean out my closet, and like it's just like getting a little crazy. So clutter around the house, and used to be meal prep, but that's something that I acknowledged a couple of years ago that like that was something that stressed me out. And I actually like cooking. And so it wasn't so much the cooking. And so we belong to HelloFresh, and they send me, or I don't have to plan my meals. I just have to like click on them a couple weeks ahead of time. Like that's what looks good. And then they send it to me, and I don't have to do all the shopping for it. And it's easy. That has decreased stress a lot. That's been
an example of practical like that, like took away something that was stressful for you, made it simple.
Yeah. And honestly, well, and it's not like it's cheap, but I have found that it saves us as a family money, because what was happening is I would go to the grocery store and like buy food with like no real like plan of like, okay, this is what I'm going to make, but like here's food, like, with some like vague plan. And then when it would come time, like I didn't want to like deal with it. Like I didn't really have a plan. And so we would end up getting takeout. And then I would toss, because the food would go bad, I would toss the food. And so like in the long run, like it's saving our family money by doing this. It's worked out. Highly recommend it if you have that problem.
That's perfect. But yeah, like identifying a problem in the house. I wish there was a service where I can send my laundry out to, but I don't. I mean, that probably is.
I think there probably is.
Can't afford it. I can't afford it. But just identifying that, like what things are around my house. And like you said, clutter, that's my thing. Like I can't, if my house isn't clean and organized and clutter free, I notice that stress starts to build up in me, and then my mood, and then so on and so forth. And so, self-care is about like being practical. Nobody's like expecting any of us to like take the time to run marathons or any of that, but just the things to make our day-to-day life more enjoyable, to free up our time to spend time with the people we care about, the things we enjoy doing, and making it a priority. Life is hard enough when, in general, but if we're hard on ourselves and we're not gentle with ourselves and we don't give ourselves permission to enjoy, what's the point, right? Like it just makes it really tough. And so that's my hope for the summer for all of us, is to really figure out where our stressors are, figure out where we want to prioritize our time, and make sure we stick to that. Don't let the new returned hustle and bustle get in the way of your happiness, and because it's easy to do.
Yeah,
right? So
absolutely. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today and talking about self-care. I hope you guys have taken away some nuggets and some inspiration of, thinking about how you're going to spend your summer and what you're going to try to incorporate in your life as something that's going to give you self-care and, like Yvonne was just saying, reduce the stressors. So hopefully you'll share with us next fall, like, this is what I did and it was successful. That would be awesome. We are having one more Zoom with the principal next week. It's just going to be like letting people who have questions for next year, and whatever questions you have, it's going to be kind of an open forum, getting your questions answered. Okay, everybody have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.